Hello and welcome to our webinar, How to Respond Quickly to the IMO 2020 Regulation. My name's Claire and I'll be your host. Before we get started, I just want to run through a few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar today, so all lines have been muted, but if you'd like to ask us a question at any time, please do so using the question pane on the right-hand side. I'm sure you've got loads of questions, so please send them through, and what we'll do is we'll go through them at the end. We've also got a couple of poll questions for you today, so please take part in these. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the questions that we've got. And lastly, everyone will receive a copy of the slides. So today's webinar is split into two sections. The first section will look at market drivers, which will be covered by Stephen George. Stephen is KBC's Chief Economist with 28 years of experience in the oil and energy sector. Stephen joined KBC in 2001 and has spent the last 12 years working with our Energy Economics Group, which is responsible for energy market analysis, supply, demand and price forecasting. Prior to being named Chief Economist in 2013, Stephen was responsible for the group's refining analytics, authored the annual outlook for the world refining industry, and has been involved in numerous projects, including feasibility assessments and transaction support. In the second section, we'll present high-level technical aspects, which will be covered by Aryan Bax. Aryan is the Operations Manager for the India, Middle East and North Africa region and is based in our Abu Dhabi office. He has 29 years global experience in the hydrocarbon industries, 20 years with KBC and 10 years with the BP Norefco refinery in the Netherlands. With KBC, Aryan has worked on a large number of strategic and technical projects, helping our clients achieve operational and capital excellence. I'll now hand over to Stephen, KBC's Chief Economist. Hi Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, everyone. We assume you're here today because you're concerned about the implications of the decision the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, took in October 2016 to adopt the earlier 2020 implementation date for lowering sulfur emissions from shipping. That decision was based on the results of a study commissioned by the IMO and conducted by the consultancy CE Delft, which determined that it will be feasible to supply the shipping industry with sufficient low sulfur bunker fuel in 2020. However, some of the findings of that study are certainly questionable. For example, its assumptions about regional fuel oil formulation. And it is important to note that the terms of reference for this study did not include affordability. As an economist, I might agree that anything is possible given a high enough price, but that doesn't mean that it won't have extreme economic consequences for the shipping industry. And because the whole matter of formulation of these new fuels is uncharted territory, it also will have a considerable impact on the refining industry. With the decision to implement in 2020, time is very short, with less than 3 years to go now before the new standards go live. The decision to go early leaves both the shipping and oil industries surrounded with market uncertainties that are highly dependent on what the other participants are able to do in this short time. It creates opportunities and risks for both industries and could potentially trigger tens of billions of dollars of capital expenditure. We'll be focusing our remarks this afternoon on the refining side of things, where KBC has many decades of experience in helping refiners to navigate market uncertainty and to adopt economic and profitable solutions. The IMO's new policies and regulations will significantly curtail demand for high sulfur fuel oil by 2020. And a new global market will emerge for a very low sulfur compliant grade of fuel oil, a product that does not exist today. At the same time, the need for the refinery upgrades to convert residual material to a compliant bunker fuel or other clean products will increase in future. It takes more time to design and execute a refining response than to fit a scrubber to a ship. But how many ships can feasibly be adapted before 2020? Or even before 2025? And what will happen to refined product markets when these investments are in place? This leads to uncertainty about which scenario refiners should anticipate. Obviously, refiners need to weigh the costs and benefits of additional investments to their assets. We assume the shift to lower sulfur emissions is a fact. There's no flexibility in the IMO adoption of these regulations. Within the refining industry, there seems to be a lot of doubt that the shipping industry will stay the course, but there is also an increasing call for strict enforcement and improved technical verification measures to force global compliance and provide a more certain investment environment. Adjustments will be required by both the fuel suppliers and consumers. The market for high sulfur fuel oil will not disappear overnight, but it will be cut by around 50%. And then, over time, it will recover slowly as the shipping industry delivers its capital investments in scrubbing, increasing demand for cheaper bunker fuel. Refiners need to decide whether they will remain in the fuel oil market. They need to decide whether to spend capital, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars, or try to operate around the market and ride out the storm. But while we consider this question, we also need to look further out. IMO hits in 2020, but what happens out to 2030 or to 2050? Are decisions made in the near term compatible with the long-term evolution of refined products markets? Is today's CapEx tomorrow's regret capital? Fundamentally, for the supplier, the IMO decision has brought these long-term decisions forward. What type or complexity of refinery will be viable in 2030 or beyond? How will the demand barrel evolve? What about the pricing for refined products? Let's start with the Middle Eastern fuel oil situation. At present, the region's demand for fuel oil is around 1.5 million barrels per day. This is roughly evenly distributed between power generation, fuel oil bunkering, and other industrial uses such as mining, making cement, and metals. Most of this is high sulfur fuel oil, reflecting the sour nature of the region's crude oil slate. And if you look carefully at the bottom of the chart on the left, you can also see that I included gas oil bunker demand to give an idea of how small a market this is at present compared to the fuel oil bunker market. On the right-hand chart, we break down that bunker fuel demand further, and we can see that around 90% of the bunker fuel market is supplied in 5 key markets: the UAE, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Oman. If we look at the region east of Suez, we can see that over the past 20 years, Middle Eastern fuel oil demand has grown strongly, cutting into exportable surpluses. This demand has been driven by surging regional demand for power and global interregional trade, with a lot of activity centered around the bunkering hub at Fujairah. Demand for bunker fuel has also grown strongly in Asia, especially in Singapore, as can be seen in the chart to the right. With the coming impact of IMO 2020, we expect fuel oil demand to decline modestly globally. In Asia, this means a slightly weaker deficit, while in the Middle East, it could lead to a recovering surplus in the intermediate period. This will be largely dependent on how the Middle East continues to fuel its growing demand for electricity. If the planned expansion of supply for natural gas, nuclear power, and renewables happens, the Middle East may continue to have an exportable surplus of fuel oil that would clear into the Asian market. In Asia, demand for fuel oil is expected to weaken after 2020, as higher prices and overcapacity drive shipping to adopt stack scrubbing or slow steaming strategies to minimize the cost impact of more expensive compliant fuel oil. We'll speak more about this later. With the passage of time, the higher penetration of scrubbers and expected continued growth in interregional trade will lead to a moderating of price and a recovery of fuel oil demand. We expect Asia-Pacific bunker demand to recover to 2020 levels by 2035. We're here today to talk about the MENA region, so why so much emphasis on Asia? Well, we can see on these 2 slides that the Middle East has a large and growing exportable product surplus, while the Asia-Pacific region has an even faster growing deficit. The makeup of this deficit consists of a large volume of feedstocks, LPG, ethane, and naphtha. It also consists of fuel oil. The scale of the emerging Asian products deficit means a durable demand for product supply from the Middle East, and this means tanker trade, and it also means more fuel oil, both for shipments of material to Asia and to meet Asia's persistent demand for import fuel oil, which will remain around 1 million barrels per day through our forecast period. At one level, we could make a simple assumption that the Middle East doesn't have an IMO 2020 problem. We can continue to make and burn fuel oil for power and industrial uses. We can move some molecules around and make enough compliant fuel oil to meet our region's relatively modest bunker fuel need. However, the bigger picture requires that we also think about the impact IMO 2020 will have on crude oil and refined product values. Regional crude oil differentials are likely to suffer as the intrinsic value of heavy sour residue falls due to a sharp drop in demand. Distillate prices are likely to surge because of growth in demand for heavy distillates for compliant fuel oil blending. The bigger picture also requires that we look over our shoulders at the Asian market, which will be our biggest demand sink for at least the next 35 years. And when we see the combined East of Suez balance is persistently short of fuel oil and will struggle to meet IMO 2020 quality requirements, we can say that while we may not have a problem, we certainly can be part of the solution. And IMO 2020 offers some potentially valuable opportunities to those refiners who are ready to exploit them. In considering a response to IMO 2020, we can see three types of investment. For growth in fast-growing markets east of Suez, for improved profitability in all markets, and for regulatory compliance, license to operate, or stay in business investment, primarily in more developed economies, especially in Europe, North America, and mature Asian markets. The questions are complex and require a bigger picture look at all the issues impacting the transformation of crude oil to finished products. What products will be in the highest demand, regionally and globally? What will happen to trade flows as a result? Can we improve energy efficiency in refining? With the Paris Agreement now ratified, how will we manage carbon emissions considerations regionally as well as globally? How will we respond to tighter SOx and NOx emissions controls across the board? The answers to these questions will be specific to a location, a region, and to the specifics of an asset. At KBC, we think this is critical to the IMO 2020 story. There is no one-size solution. There's much uncertainty, there are technology options, there are strategic considerations. Taken as a whole, we can design the best potential approach. I'm going to stop here for a moment, and we're going to conduct our first poll. Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yep, so I'll just bring up our first poll. And here we go. You should see the poll question on your screen. So all you need to do is just click the option that is relevant to you. So we'd like to hear from you on whether you have started planning for 2020. So the options are: yes, we have an option; yes, we're considering our options; no, we haven't thought about it; and no, we don't know where to start. Great, I can see you've all answered, so I'll close the poll and share the results just so that you can have a look. Great, so 100% we're all considering our options. That's great to see. So I'll just hand back to Stephen to continue with the webinar slides.
Thanks, Claire. To start to address the critical questions we've just raised, we need to rethink how we look at bunker fuel production. In the Middle East, we need to substitute around 300,000 BPD of demand currently supplied by high sulfur bunker fuel. Today, residue bunker fuel is a blend of the lower value heavy components in the refinery: high sulfur residue, visbroken tar, FCC slurry, blended with a minimum content of higher value cutter material to meet the specifications for density, sulfur, and viscosity. To achieve a 0.5 weight percent sulfur product, however, we'll be making a much higher quality, on-purpose finished product. In some respects, much more like a distillate. It'll be made from distillates hydrotreated residues, sweet or treated vacuum gas oil, and other low sulfur components. It will be a much more complex cocktail of components where sulfur may not be the only concern. Flash point, viscosity, stability, and cost will also be issues. And all compliant bunker fuels will not look alike. The feasibility study proposed that the Middle East could produce compliant bunker using the recipe at right, which includes 130,000 barrels per day of hydrotreated atmospheric residue and a further 135,000 BPD of H-oil products. Here's one of our critiques of the Delft study. The last time we looked, there's nothing like that much H-oil capacity in the region, planned or installed. Folks, this doesn't look like old school bunker. Not many refiners could make this kind of a blend by themselves. And notice that there's no place in the pool for those low-value byproducts like vacuum residue or FCC slurry. These will have to find a home somewhere else. Therefore, to make a compliant fuel may require the consideration of major capital investment, joint ventures, crude oil or intermediate blend stock swaps, or a combination of any or all of these. Dozens of refineries acting independently are unlikely to arrive at the same recipe proposed here, especially if the products themselves do not exist. The formulation of compliant fuels will result in a reordering of the demand barrel, which means that some products and intermediates will have a higher value as bunker fuel components than their current alternative use. A rough order of precedence will emerge, with sweet straight-run vacuum residue and atmospheric residue from sweet crudes being the first in the pool. Thereafter, competition for higher value components will depend on the scale of demand for a compliant bunker. When demand is high, at 2020, the pool will likely require sweet vacuum gas oil, straight-run distillates, and hydrotreated blend stocks. As demand moderates, some of these more valuable components will not be required, and the price spread between high sulfur fuel oil and compliant bunker can narrow. We expect the marginal components will effectively set the price of compliant bunker, with bunker initially pricing near distillate. With some ships opting to scrub in order to continue to burn low-cost bunkers, eventually an equilibrium price will emerge, where fitting scrubbers is not economically justified. This could take 5 years or more. Recently, Lloyd's Registry suggested it could be 15 years before the market equilibrates. However, we believe that a wide spread of perhaps $200 per ton between high sulfur fuel oil and compliant bunker will drive new innovation and strong competition both on the shipping side and amongst bunker suppliers, that is, refiners, blenders, and traders. If there's any doubt that this reordering will happen, we can look to the future via the product forward curves on the Intercontinental Exchange, the ICE. On this chart, we can see how the IMO announcement in late October led to an immediate breakdown in 2019 for the high sulfur fuel oil crack, the relationship between the price of high sulfur fuel oil and Brent crude oil. With the passage of time to January, we can see how the market view has evolved. The expectation is that the fuel oil crack, shown in dotted lines, starts to break down in mid-2019, with lead time for stock rotation and tank cleaning ahead of the switchover. We can see that the crack spread for low sulfur gas oil, shown as solid lines, is rising on the expectation that demand for distillates will increase as they are pulled into the bunker pool, tightening up the distillate supply. The fuel oil crack drops by $7 a barrel, or around $45 per ton, while the distillate crack strengthens by around $2 a barrel, or around $15 per ton. This on top of an existing spread of around $24 per barrel, or $170 per ton. If you're turning high sulfur crude into distillates today, your uplift is set to get a lot better. If you're marketing high sulfur fuel oil, you need to be aware of the storm brewing. Overnight at 2020, demand for high sulfur fuel oil will fall by around 3 to 3.5 million barrels per day, about half of the current total. There will still be demand for some of this material, but there will be keen competition and cracks will weaken, likely down to levels where either marginal crude production or refining is no longer economic. I also wanted to note that this will have a major impact on crude oil differentials, with sweet crude differentials strengthening and sour crudes weakening relative to Brent. We expect there to be a pivot point somewhere perhaps around Brent quality, where crudes that make residues can be blended to bunker command a premium, while crudes that require considerable dilution by other streams experience a decline in their differential. This price response triggers a multitude of operational considerations about relative skimming and cracking contributions to refining margin, about trade-offs between sweet and sour crudes and intermediates in the supply chain, and about the virtues of crude oil switching or segregated batch operations. I'm going to save some of the development for these themes for my colleague Arjen, whom I'll hand over to shortly. Before I do, we also need to look beyond the Middle East. Historically, Asia has met its demand for fuel oil by purchasing cargoes from the Middle East, Europe, and Russia. This has solved the problem for refiners without enough upgrading capacity to process all of their heavy streams. However, demand for this material has fallen by 3 million barrels per day since 2005. There are some key structural factors for the decrease in fuel oil consumption. The ongoing switch from fuel oil to natural gas in the power sector, a switch from fuel oil to crude oil feedstock amongst China's independent refineries, ECA gas oil bunkering, and the slow but steady uptake of LNG bunkering. We've also seen a reduction in supply as a result of upgrading investment in numerous markets, the Mediterranean, the Middle East Gulf, and Russia in particular. We mustn't forget that after 2020, though headline fuel oil demand may persist, there won't be room in the pool for a lot of the higher sulfur intermediates. This will challenge the refiners who make them, and also the crude producers who sell sour crude. On the bunker side, we expect IMO 2020 to trigger some contraction in bunker fuel demand. Some segments of the shipping industry, including containers and tankers, are presently experiencing overcapacity. When fuel is expensive and excess capacity exists, ships can opt for slow steaming, slowing down to proportionally reduce fuel consumption as a percentage of total operating cost. Additionally, some ship owners facing overcapacity may just opt to scrap their ships. Recent reports have suggested this is an increasingly common occurrence, even for relatively new ships. If daily charter rates cannot cover operating costs, and operating costs are about to rise, we may see a rise in scrappage. Whether from slow steaming or scrapping, we expect a demand decline to 2020 that then starts to recover in the medium term. This slide shows KBC's overview of bunker fuel demand outlook to 2030 in 7 different regions. As shown, the decline will be most prominent in Asia and in North America, though in the longer term, we expect Asia to make a recovery. We can see with a cost-sensitive and competitive shipping industry, there's a lot of uncertainty for the demand scenario. Overall, the headline figure for bunker fuel oil demand will be lower than it is today. KBC expects global bunker fuel oil demand will further decline from 3.5 million barrels per day to 3.4 million barrels per day in 2020 and 3.3 million barrels per day in 2030. Finally, from my perspective, oil movements and market interactions now are not regional. They're increasingly global. Pricing shifts in Singapore change the value of materials in Rotterdam. Crude oil quality and sales destinations are now more open than ever before. US shale oil, gas, and NGLs are making the voyage to Europe and Asia. And therefore, when we look at the decision boundaries for scenarios we develop, it's necessary to consider the regional and global view, especially as it relates to all heavy fuel production. As an example, how will Japanese refiners respond to the recovery of their nuclear industry and the decline in temporary demand for low-sulfur fuel oil? Will Japan become an exporter of low-sulfur bunker or blending components? And what impact would this have on the Singapore market that Middle Eastern refiners trade into? We need to understand these developments to help shape our own market responses. Without a doubt, IMO 2020 will trigger major capital spending both in the shipping and refining industry. The questions are, where and by whom? For some, these will be questions of survival. For others, possibly a golden age of refining, but who knows for how long. With this snapshot of the evolving global bunker market, I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Arjen. I did just want to add that our Energy Economics group has been following this issue for the past 10 years, and we've developed a lot of insight that might be put to use in your response to IMO 2020. A robust testing of the market scenarios that underpin your own response should be part of any solution. Over to you, Arjen.
Thank you, Steve. And good afternoon, everyone. Now, this section of the webinar addresses the high-level technical aspects of the IMO mandate and the impacts on the refiners. The global refining capacity has been growing. Also, both the demand and pricing of the bottom of the barrel products has declined. This will create a profitability challenges for the refineries without bottom of the barrel conversion capabilities. Consider this, the yield of the bottoms product ranges from 10 to 50 weight% on crude. And even cracking refineries without bottom conversion or desulfurization can have high sulfur fuel oil yields up to 30%. If a drop of $10 to $20 per barrel in fuel oil prices occur, this will have a dramatic impact on the refining margin and thus the viability of low complexity facilities with high sulfur residue yields. Refineries with zero fuel oil configuration and also integrated with petrochemical complexes are the best off. And that is the general shift we see with new large refinery petrochemical complex facilities that are built in the region. These systems typically have a Nelson complexity index of 14 to 16, and that allows them to adequately cope with the storms of the pricing and demand changes that we see and are expecting. Here again are some market considerations. And these consideration reviews are provided as an example. So if you have a high sulfur fuel oil price drop of $10 per barrel, which we think is realistic, and Steve showed that in previous slides, that means a delta of about $67 per metric ton. Means that if you consider a fuel oil price of about $270 per ton, that will result in $203 per ton after the drop. Now for an average size refinery, 300,000 barrels a day with a 30% high sulfur residue yield, this will be about a $330 million per year loss, quite significant. And then consider this. When the high sulfur fuel oil price will drop to just above coal, and some people think this is realistic, that would mean a loss of about $1 billion per year for the same capacity. And that is all while cracker feed prices are rising due to the increased demand created by blend requirements for the new very low sulfur high fuel oil. Crude swap is an option and will be part of a strategy for some, but there is simply not enough sweet crude in the world to meet the demand to make very low sulfur bunker fuel. It will also come at a price, as the heavy sour to light sweet differentials will open up. And lastly, we can consider dilution or blending. Now, 1 barrel of 3.5% sulfur bunker require more than 7 barrels of ULSD to blend to 0.5% sulfur fuel. Even if we consider that half of the high sulfur fuel oil market can be used in ships with scrubbers, attempting to blend or dilute the other half of the high sulfur fuel oil will exceed the total demand by a factor greater than 2. Conclusion is that blending, optimizing crude operations, optimizing your day-to-day operation, repurposing some units, crude swaps, and major or minor investments are all part of the strategy considerations going forward. Now over to Claire again for another poll question. Claire, up to you.
Thanks, Arjen. Yep, so I'll just bring up our second question. So again, you just need to tick or select the option on the screen, and we'd like to know, does your refinery rely on bunker fuel oil sales to dispose of residue streams? So you just need to pick one. So yes, and bunker fuel oil is our only outlet. Yes, but we have alternate outlets. No, because we are a zero fuel oil export refinery. And no, our fuel oil residue production is sold to other users. So I can see that people are still selecting their options, so I'll give you a couple more seconds. So does your refinery rely on bunker fuel oil sales to dispose of residue streams? Okay, and that looks like everyone has voted now, I think. And so let's just close that poll and I'll share the results with you. Okay, so we're almost even with the top two. So 33% have said yes, bunker fuel oil is our only outlet, and 50% have said yes, but we have alternate outlets. And we've got 17% at the bottom there with no, our fuel oil residue production is sold to other users. Great, thanks everyone. So I'll just hand back to Arjen now.
Thanks, Claire. We go to the next slide. So here we see that the slide with the low sulfur bunker impacts. The IMO mandate is moving us towards a more green operation in the world. Low sulfur emissions are the requirement, either by scrubbing or fuel sources. You've seen that before. The challenge for those that are producing high sulfur fuel oil is what options should be considered to remain competitive beyond 2020. Remember, the high sulfur fuel oil prices will become under pressure, and they can represent a large portion of the refinery product slate. This will directly impact the refinery margin significantly. Even if some ships remain in high sulfur fuel oil service, the bigger question comes in the context of global refining capacity increases and margin shifts. Ultimately, it's about the fuel oil price, the disposition of high sulfur residues, and the margin impact for low complexity refineries. As some would say, it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when these impacts will take place. So what is the fundamental problem to be solved? In all other fuel supplies or even petrochemical systems, the industry has sufficient transparency that a demand and supply picture can be developed with some degree of reliability. It's never perfect, but with some degree of reliability. Thus, plans can be made on investments because the demand picture is pretty clear and the risks are bounded. In the shipping industry, this is not true. The shipping or bunkering business has been anything but transparent. There are two huge issues in the face of the shipping industry. First, reporting of emissions information on bunkering are possibly not totally transparent or completely honest. And second, there's an overcapacity. The shipping industry is in severe overcapacity where bankruptcies, mergers, and low freight rates are part of the backdrop. Also note that a lot of shipping is via charter, and the charterer is responsible for the fuel and not the owner. And that is why the owner is not keen to invest in scrubbers. Because of this lack of transparency and the present severe state of the industry, scrubber installations will be relatively few. An exception is on the cruise liner business, because here the owners are often the operators and hence will benefit directly. And also the consumer population has created a request for a more green image. But there is still not a runaway on scrubber installation, even on cruises. Now from a technical point of view, to produce low sulfur fuel, hydrodesulfurization is required. Thus, the hydrogen requirement along with the sulfur handling systems need to be studied in detail. Currently, there are incentives to reduce distillate blend components in fuel oil, as distillate is currently worth more as a finished diesel than a diluent in bunker. But that is not going to stay. It's likely going to change. This slide addresses the option of crude switch out or swaps. That is trying to meet the very low sulfur heavy fuel oil production by feedstock selection. Technically, low sulfur crude is always an option. However, this option must be clearly defined for a refiner. Availability is always an issue. And generating 0.5% sulfur fuel by crude selection only will be very challenging. Though light sweet shale and tight oils are becoming more available, the world continues to find heavy sour crudes. And these heavy sour crudes are predominantly available in the Middle East region. The challenge here is the reduced flexibility in crude sourcing, while continuing to produce bunker fuel. Locations that have access to a wider variety of crude sources, such as India, or have locked in access to light sweet crudes at advantageous prices, will gain the advantage for this option. In this slide, we summarize some of the bottom of the barrel technology options available today. The table summarizes the known technologies and comments around the applicability. The cost values are relative, as size, timing, and location make a big difference. Further, in any catalyst option, one has to consider catalyst cycles, metal loads on the catalyst, and disposal issues with these loaded catalysts. Also, the catalyst change-out times will have to be taken into account. Operating costs analysis become significant in the evaluation of options. Each technology option provides a high degree of uplift. That means upgrading feedstock to more valuable products, such as gasoline and diesel. The disposition of the bottom stream in these technologies requires a careful evaluation for each particular refinery and situation. Delayed coking provides a good, relatively low-cost, low-pressure technology solution, and many are applying this. This technology is widely used. However, coke disposal is sometimes a restriction, especially for landlocked facilities. Additional upgrading of intermediate light product from coker is required. Slurry hydrocracking is gaining a lot of interest. This technology is relatively new, and it provides a high conversion of the residue. Currently, there are no running commercial units. Licensors, however, are pushing this technology very hard. Great care is required to ensure that processing boundaries are included in any evaluation, and that the capability of the process to treat a particular feed is reviewed. Every refinery is unique, and there is no fit-for-all solutions. So what are refineries currently doing in the region? Well, it's a variety. Most new refineries have no or very limited fuel oil production. Some refineries already produce low sulfur fuel oil through desulfurization, but often not to the level required for the very low sulfur heavy fuel oil for bunker markets. Some refineries produce heavy fuel oil for power generation, and those have different sulfur specifications. Some refineries currently study the option to comply with the IMO 2020 regulations And this is mostly through investment options, through a combination of reconfigurations, revamping, repurposing. And other refineries have not started to study the impacts of these new regulations. Now, all of you on the call voted in the first poll that you are considering your impacts, so the last point is not so applicable for you. India produces high sulfur fuel oil in some refineries. A lot of refineries have cokers as well. Increased bottom conversions are considered by some of these refineries that don't have cokers, but mainly in combination with other upgrades that are required for other product specifications in the diesel and gasoline products. So it's more a combination of, not standalone. Many refineries around the world are still studying in-house and maintaining confidentiality about their plans. Some refineries engage KBC in studies, also in the region. The high-level options are clear for those refiners still producing high sulfur residues. Either move to zero fuel oil production with some combination of hydroprocessing, upgrading, carbon rejection. Each refinery implications, each with different implications on the refinery margin and flexibility. Or they stay in the fuel oil bunkering business, either by crude selection or blending. It's expensive with reduced crude slate options, and it will reduce the refinery gross margin considerably. Investing in additional hydroprocessing of some kind will be required if you want to stay in the bunker business. So it's a strategic question as well as a technical one. And the strategy chosen should look beyond 2020, 2025. And it may be a multiple step strategy to apply capital effectively and maximize the rate of return. So we know the issues, the causes and the effects, the market disturbance, but where and when will the industry be back in balance? The demand for fuels will impact sources to make up the marine fuels beyond 2020. If blending would be pursued in majority, a very large volume increase of very low sulfur heavy fuel oil will result, as we saw before. Now, blend 7 barrels of ULSD with 1 barrel of 3.5% bunker to produce the very low sulfur heavy fuel oil. So this will cause, of course, a drop in the bunker prices dramatically, and that will impact the refinery profitability. For a new balance to be achieved, high sulfur residues must be taken out of the current bunker market by destruction, through increased conversion or carbon rejection, or by displacing to an alternative market like power plants. But this option is diminishing in the green world. Reduced power plant demand as a result of increased alternative energy supply, like wind and solar. Power plants are also using cleaner fuels to burn, like natural gas. The use of distillates as either marine gas oil or diluents to blend to very low sulfur heavy fuel oil will raise the price of marine fuels. The blended formulation of very low sulfur heavy fuel oil from heavy fuel oil and low sulfur diluents will approach that of the marine gas oil. So what are the drivers here? For the ship operators is cheap fuel to install scrubbers. Some low complexity refineries will be at the danger of closing due to low or very negative margins, especially when carbon tax is added to the operating cost. The global system will need time to achieve a level of balance, and that balance will take some time. It's already starting, and it will probably take until 2025 and beyond to rebalance. Physics tells us a body in motion tends to stay in motion. As part of the strategy, it's critical to look beyond 2020, 2025, and maybe even further than that. There is a constant change in the world. Nothing stays the same. The IMO has already mandated that all bunker fuel be entered into a database for it to collect real-time information. Mass metering will ensure fuel consumption visibility on ships. Ship-based emission monitoring will tighten things up. And then there is the obvious push that in future 0.5% sulfur equivalent emissions will be pushed even lower, not forgetting the impact of potential lowering CO2 emissions as well. In summary, KBC believes that the refining industry is capable of meeting the challenges to achieve the specification changes. The question in this slide defines the reality of the situation for the relatively low complexity refinery making fuel oil. For those with bottom upgrading, they will see an opportunity to buy cheap high sulfur fuel oil and residues and make an handsome profit. There will be a significant window of opportunity for those refineries with spared or revamped upgrading capacity. For those that remain making high sulfur fuel oil, they will struggle to remain in operation without any investment. The industry is making a fundamental shift to complex facilities co-located with petrochemical plants. Locations that invest and don't have a carbon tax will be the winners here. Today, there are cost considerations for both the supplier and the user, supplier being the refineries, the user being the shippers, and there's a huge disconnect between shipping and refining. Broadly speaking, the shipping industry believes that in the supply chain, the refineries will be ready to meet the market requirements, and that will be the solution. Now, the refinery industry believes that shipping will implement scrubbers in the short term, and some are waiting to know how many of these scrubbers will be installed. Reality? Shippers don't have cash to make all these investments for systems such as scrubbers and ballast water management systems. We saw before that these shippers are under pressure. Some question as to whether scrubbing will indeed meet the 0.5 sulfur content emissions. And will that investment be a regret investment if emission regulations tighten up again in the future? It is possible that 2/3 of the bunker fuels will be non-high sulfur fuel oil. It may be diluted low sulfur fuel oil, marine diesel, marine gas oil, LNG, or maybe some mix. The climate change potential of LNG is currently being studied with respect to methane slippage to the atmosphere. On the other hand, we also see an increase in LNG ship builds and announcements of those. KBC believe that there is time to work on solutions, but it should be a priority. The clock is ticking. Study options should include the assessment of specific scenarios and associated risk analysis. For refiners, in case of a catalyst route, this means managing metals on catalyst, managing cycle length of your catalyst change out times, because that means unavailability of your plants, hydrogen production, hydrogen demand balances. They will all come with critical decisions. It is not necessarily a bad thing, but purely something to be mindful of. It reinforces the need for a complete system analysis. There are foundational shifts in the bunkering services with data tracking and compliance monitoring that will forever change the shipping industry, and more information may surface. How the refinery responds now? It may take a difference in operations in 2020, and whether that refinery is running or shut down after that. Sorry, struggling with the system. Today, it's wise to measure twice and cut once. When considering the action related to IMO 0.5 sulfur percent requirement, KBC is not a licensor. It's not a licensor of any upgrading technology, but we do have the tools and the simulation software to help you make the best decision. There are many options. It's not only revamps and investments, but also determining the appropriate operating windows of your existing units, review of your blending options, your crude selection, and any molecular level analysis will help you to will help to identify and evaluate these options and allow you to define a sound strategy for the future. KBC is the only industry consultant that can undertake these molecular management studies in this way. Being unbiased and independent brings the client interest first. There's no royalty involved or looking for an eventual construction contract when you partner with KBC. KBC is a global company, now part of the Yokogawa Group, and we have worked in every major region of the world. We have practical knowledge and in all of the major asset operational boundaries from real world perspectives. We have a defined methodology. We have staff that have real operational experience across the globe, and we have the toolkit to provide a robust analysis for the refinery to make an informed decision going forward. KBC is not defining the choice, rather providing an unbiased advice without emotion or preconceived beliefs. Our state-of-the-art set of tools reinforces KBC's capabilities to provide an optimum solution. KBC works with the refinery as a trusted advisor, teaming up towards a customized solution that addresses what is critical for you, the client, in a specific region with your specific conditions, in your specific marketplace. In essence, in this manner, KBC becomes an extension of the refinery's owners, engineers, staff, bringing our experience, tools, and methodology to the table. So it's clear, each refinery and location is different and unique. And each refinery has its own unique set of problems with their unique solutions. If nothing else, I would like you to take this away from today's webinar. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to success. KBC recognizes that and is good in evaluating various scenarios without a bias. Now, this brings us to the end of my part, and Claire, over to you again.
Thanks, Arjen. We have gone over time, but I think if we do just one or two questions, if you are able to stay on the line, that would be great. So we'll just cover off a couple of questions. So one that we've had in is asking, is there any indication as to whether countries that are not ready at 2020 will be allowed to market high sulfur fuel oil under strict monitoring until investments are complete? Stephen, do you want to answer that one first?
Sure, thanks, Claire. We haven't heard any news of any wiggle room, any tolerances that are going to be allowed to allow shipping to continue to use high sulfur bunker without scrubbing. If anything, the shipping industry is pushing for stricter enforcement to ensure a level playing field. And we would encourage refiners to do that as well. It's in our interest. The onus will be on ship operators to prove they're complying, as Arjen said. So show us your fuel oil purchase log. Show us where you discharge your sludge at a certified facility. And we should remember too that there will continue to be a market for high sulfur fuel oil after 2020, both for bunkering and for other industrial and power uses. Ships that scrub will have a considerable OPEX benefit. If scrubbers remove the sulfur, I wonder if there's any reason why we couldn't even see higher sulfur fuel oil marketed. There are a lot of residues out there, for instance, with sulfur above 4%.
Arian, is there anything you want to add at all to that question?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, some hope that there may be some phases, but that's very unlikely. Given the ease of how the market switched to how the refinery industry made the switch to the lower sulfur fuel in the ECA zone, and the switch to lower sulfur products in diesel and gasoline. How they coped with that? There's a real expectation that the refineries will cope with this new requirement as well. And the shippers, they expect the refineries to do so, to produce this lower sulfur fuel. And if they do so and don't install the scrubbers, then it's our business again. We cannot. We have to supply the lower sulfur fuel oil. Worst case for the ship owners is that they will fuel up with marine diesel, but of course there's not enough of it. Yeah, and we may have to absorb additional costs, and also the ship owners need to absorb additional costs if they go for more marine diesel and the market will tide up. Yeah, that's what I can add to this question.
Great, thanks, Arian. And the second question that I think we've got time for, could this change drive low conversion refineries out of business? Arian, I think that's one for you.
Yeah, the answer is yes, as I indicated in the slides. You have to start, the lower conversion refineries have to start the future now and give that a priority. Some refineries will have access to lower sulfur crudes to produce the low sulfur bunker fuel. But remember, there are not that many crudes that can produce low sulfur bunker from by crude selection only. It's 0.5% sulfur in the bunker. That's very low. But that may be an option. Then of course there is another market for your high sulfur fuel oil. Some of you indicated in the polls that you are supplying other markets, so that will probably continue, although in future that may be reduced. The power generation may want to switch to a lower sulfur, more green fuel, or even natural gas, biofuels. Yeah, so thinking back on the crude selection, if you go that route, you have to remember that we expect the low sulfur crude price to go up considerably as the demand will rise to make the low sulfur bunker market. So supply chain planning becomes very important. Locking in these crudes wherever you can. Prices will be high, so margins will reduce below. And yeah, that's what I think. So in short, yes, we think some refineries will suffer considerably from this change in the fuel oil market, in the bunker market.
Great, thanks, Arian. Okay, so we have actually run out of time. I'd just like to thank everybody for joining and to thank our speakers today. For those of you that have submitted questions, we'll reach out to you individually. If you think of a question after today's webinar, please reach out to us on the screen. You can see the email address for Arian and for Stephen, and also the marketing email address, which will come straight to me. Thank you for taking part in our polls. There is a short survey after the webinar today, so please give us your feedback on how you think the webinar went and if you've got any suggestions for future webinars. So thank you once again, everyone, and we hope to see you on one of our webinars again soon.
Thanks, everyone.